Welcome to the Nature Here TV show. Today we have a special piano piece that is played by a Hungarian pianist of Mozart, and the song was inspired by his pet starling. Today with us we have Arden and Sherry Hagen. Thank you for coming with us, bird enthusiasts. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Go ahead.
I'm the newsletter editor and the website designer for Vancouver Audubon. I've been doing it since the mid-'80s. I teach birding classes before regular meetings and sometimes do programs for them on the side.
Nice.
And I'm the field trip chair for them. I've been doing that about 20 years. I organize and lead most of the field trips we do around the local area, some to the coast. We have led trips around the United States with our Audubon group, and we're thinking about doing one internationally next year.
Expanding out a little bit.
Yes.
Nice. And you guys do, is this something you guys do together?
Yeah, and
Yes.
they're fundraisers.
Okay,
Usually
so.
they're fundraisers. Not the ones around the United States are fundraisers, the local ones are not.
Okay, and do they have like volunteers that help and different promotional things that they can do?
Well, we organize the trips ourselves.
Do everything yourself? Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what is something that made you a serious birder?
Well, I always liked birds from the time I was a little kid. I used to check their nests in the trees around the farm and see how they're progressing, see the eggs laid, see the babies raised, things like that. So I've always liked
The
them.
interest was there at a young age.
Yes.
And I lived on a ranch farm too, and my parents had bluebird nest boxes outside of our dining room window, and we always had the birds there, and my grandmother lived just a quarter of a mile across the field, and she had bird feeders and bird nest boxes too. And then I learned that my other grandmother also had interest in birds, and she had this little bird book in her thing and in her stuff, and had obviously traveled back east and marked off birds in the book. And so with our interest, my mom gave us for our anniversary in 1979 this golden guidebook to birds of North America. At that time it was one of the few bird guides around, and that got us started identifying the birds in our backyard. And then when we went on trips with the kids, we would identify the birds there. And pretty soon we started taking trips around the states and just to identify birds.
The other way around.
Yeah.
Nice. The smaller book that was your grandma's, did you find out later on in life, or had you always known that she was a bird enthusiast?
I didn't, because she died when I was like 5 or 6.
So that's incredible that later on down the road that you,
And then I got this book, and
that's great.
Yeah.
Nice. What do you like most about birds? Like what?
Well, I mean, they're colorful. They have beautiful songs. They do interesting things. You'll see some of that maybe in another program. But and functionally, they eat a lot of insects. So they have a niche in our ecosystem. Without them, we'd have a lot more insects, have to use some more pesticides, things like that. So they're useful.
Helpful. They're helping us.
Yes.
Okay. How many total birds have you guys, species I should say, have you guys?
Species, yes. I've seen 3,255. She's seen 3,240 in the world. And there's just a little over 10,000 species, so we're not quite a third of the way there.
That's still so much. Why do you keep track of them on a piece of paper? Like I don't know how many birds I've seen, but I can guarantee it's not been that many.
Yeah. We keep them on a program on a computer.
So you keep track of them.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So if you were to go out to the side of another country, what would be something that you would prefer? Well, first of all, how do you choose the country? Maybe I should go that route first.
Well, we study where there'd be a lot of good birds, new birds we could see. We weigh the cost of doing that the safety of the country, things like that, before we pick a country.
When we first started, it was more bang for the buck.
Yeah.
Right, I'm sure. I'm sure it's a little different now.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And how do you, what would prepare for it? Like, what would be like the first couple things you'd probably do before you? Obviously, you pick the country or an area that you want to go, and then you have to
First,
take
you need
it
to
from
have
there.
a passport.
Right, clearly.
And that takes, so you just don't get a passport. You have to
Take some
fill out a
time.
form, and it has to be sent off, and you have to be approved and all this stuff. So you need a passport. You need to have all your immunizations up to date, tetanus and a few other things. You need to travel to these foreign countries. Then we figure out what kind of habitat we're going to be in, what kind of weather conditions we're going to incur. So we pack for that, and you want to pack light. The less you have to take, the better off you are, because you don't want to be towing 3 or 4 suitcases around with you
When you're
you
out
travel.
and about the whole time.
Yes.
And do you travel with, is it just normally you two, or do you try to take more people with you? Even if it wasn't in like a group, I mean, do you have like friends that would go with you, or is it normally just you two
We've
that
done
kind
Done.
a little bit of everything,
Okay.
but we prefer to be the 2 of us with a guide. We always hire a guide. We never do it on our own.
Okay.
Or a couple friends, yeah.
Yeah, or sometimes we go with a few friends, but
Yeah.
mostly we prefer the couple because you get all the attention, you get all of the benefit of the guide. It's more expensive, but we prefer it that way.
But then you can be a little bit greedier and get the best of the best when you do it
You
that
get
way.
you get all the good
That
good
makes-
birds, and
That
you don't
makes
get,
sense. There's
yeah,
nothing wrong with that.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, what a cost of a trip? What do you think like an average cost would
Oh,
be?
it's hard to say, yeah.
It's hard to say.
Depending on the country, obviously travel arrangements is
Yes.
going to be your most
Yeah.
expensive. Your
Some
flight and
countries
things
are
like
more
that.
expensive. Peru was more expensive than Ecuador, things like that. So that's part of the.
But if someone wanted to like just to kind of venture out, maybe they have been international travel anyway, so someplace maybe not quite so, I don't want to say exotic, but so far off of the United States, what would be a good place for somebody to like start?
I would recommend Costa Rica, which was our first one. We'll get into that later, but Costa Rica was our first trip, and Ecuador is wonderful. That was one of my favorite ones.
So those would be fairly simple, not so, you know,
Yes.
not going too crazy on someone that's not really done it before.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and you've got some slides that you're going to show us and some trips that you've been on.
Yes.
Arden always wanted to go birding out of the States, south of the United States. And I was always afraid that there would be a Sandinista or drug lord hiding behind every bush. And so I always said no to any trip outside of the United States. But he had a 50th birthday party birthday coming up, and I wanted to do something special that he wouldn't even know what was coming. So behind his back, I planned out a trip to Costa Rica. I had everything sent to work. And so 3 months before, so he had time to get his passport, I threw him a birthday party and surprised him. And when I gave him the book to Costa Rica, he was just,
Bored.
he did not see it coming at
I
all.
imagine.
And so we birded in Costa Rica, first on the dry Pacific side, hot dry. We went into the Chile Mountains for birds like the resplendent quetzal. And then we went to the wet mountainside where Rancho Naturalista is, hard just for me to say, where we saw these birds like the Hoffman's woodpecker and the blue-gray tanager. And you sat on the veranda and watched the bird feeders every day and drank tea and had treats at certain time in the afternoon. The birds were beautiful. The hummingbirds were plentiful. I mean, there were so many species in just a week that we were hooked. So birding
Overwhelmed
outside,
by all
yes,
these birds. and
yes.
amazing
So
things.
birding outside the United States was definitely
like,
going to
Okay, I'm not
happen.
worried about anything else anymore. We are going.
Yeah.
It was really sensory overload.
I'm sure it was.
Yes, it
Yeah.
was. So our second trip, we went to Trinidad, and we had some friends that were going to go, and they said, why don't you come to Trinidad with us? And so we said, okay. So we went up with 4 couples going there, and we stayed at the Asa Wright Nature Sanctuary, which it used to be a plantation in the old days, and then when the owner died, his wife let it go back to jungle, and they turned it into a nature preserve. She liked nature, so. And that's a good place to get lost. There's no newspaper, there's no television, there's no radio, nothing.
Takes you back to the basics.
Takes you back to the basics, although the accommodations are good, but yeah, there's no outside interference. They had a big veranda you could sit on and watch birds like this purple honey creeper you see on the screen. That's one of Sherry's favorites.
That's a beautiful
And
bird.
you could sit there all day, but we walked the trails around the lodge, and every other day we hired a guide to take us out around the island and show us birds around the island. And so that was good. And since it's an English-speaking country and has English influence, you had tea every day at 4 o'clock if you were there, and it had a little dessert with it. And then they served you rum punch at 6 o'clock because Trinidad is famous for its rum, so you had to have rum punch.
Haven't you? Obviously.
And then you had dinner at 7:30 every night. And then some of the highlights of the trip were we went to the Coroni swamp in the evening to watch the ibises and the egrets come in to roost in the mangrove trees, and it made the mangrove trees look like Christmas trees, so white and a lot of white and red on them. And the other thing was they had a cave on the sanctuary, and the oil birds roosted in there. Excuse me, they roosted in there during the day because they're nocturnal, and they fly at night and eat fruit.
Oh.
So
Interesting.
that was highlighted that. And then the third trip we did was to Panama, and I wanted to surprise Sherry for her 50th birthday. So
Boy, 50th birthdays are great birthdays.
Turnabout is fair play. So we wound up going to Panama using our frequent flyer miles, so that cut some of the cost
Nice.
down. But we did go in a group of 12. That's the biggest group we were ever in, and we had a lot of fun. It was a great trip, but we decided that was too big a group for
Too
us.
many. It would seem like 12
It
seems
was
like a
hard to
large-
see things sometimes because there's so many people wanting to see them all at once. So that's why we prefer the smaller. Or
6
just
and
the two of
probably
us.
less. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think in anything, 12 that's quite a few.
Yeah.
Luckily, we had people like biologists and nest people, so they weren't always clamoring for the birds.
Been there, done that, so they're
Yeah.
not so.
So our leader his name was Hernan Arauz. His family is famous in Panama, and he's a famous bird guide there now. And we visited the Darien jungle, which the Pan American Highway stops at the Darien jungle, which is now the Darien National Park, thanks to this Hernan Arauz. He took the president of Panama there because they were going to do some mining and things in there, and he didn't want that, so he took the president of Panama there, and after he showed him this wonderful place, he came back and said, none of that, it's going to be a national park.
Oh, that's
So this
great.
one man turned that around.
That's incredible.
So, yeah, so you can't drive from Panama to Colombia. After you get to
Because
Colombia,
of
then
that.
you can continue on down to Chile on the Pan American Highway, but
Because that
that
national
one
park
little spot, there's no road.
has made it. Wow.
So you cannot
Good-
drive the
good to
entire
know.
length. So some of the things we saw there was the violet saberwing. It's kind of obscured on this screen on the left. And the other one is a white-throated mountain gem. They're both hummingbirds. And my favorite bird on the trip was the three-wattled bellbird.
The 3 wattled bell.
Three-wattled. He had 3
It's a
black
tongue
things hanging
twister.
off of his bill. And they're interesting because when they call it, he sticks his head forward and goes, gong, like that. That's why they call them bellbirds.
Nice.
Our next trip was to Ecuador. It was a safe country, and it's one of the top 5 for species, number of species in it. So we flew to Quito, and we met Edison Benano, who was to be our tour guide. We went to the cloud forest west of Quito. We went to the cold Andes. We went to the hot, humid Amazon. And then we went to the lowlands. We soon learned that Edison would take very good care of us. He was a great guide, and he knew all the birds and all the calls. He quickly became a very good friend of ours. We called him Eddie. He has come to visit us and met our family. One of the highlights, some of the highlights on the trip were the sword-billed hummingbird with a very long curved bill, the booted rackettail, the violet-tailed sylph, and my target bird, the purple velvet coronet.
Purple, clearly.
Purple,
I've
yeah.
got that. Got it.
And that's a hummingbird.
They are all hummingbirds. On our next trip to Ecuador, here at the Umbrella Bird Lodge, in the southern part of Ecuador, we visited that part this time. We went to the coast, we went to rainforest, we went to dry forest, and everything in between. One afternoon, it was too wet and rainy to go out and bird into the forest, so we stayed at the lodge on the veranda and just enjoyed all the birds coming to the feeders. I was in heaven.
You look in heaven there.
I love hummingbirds. The long-tailed long-wattled umbrella bird, was not too far away from the lodge, and at dusk, you could go out and look into the top of the tall trees, and he would display, hoping to draw in a mate. Ah, okay. And there was a new species found in Ecuador about that time called a Hocotoco antpeta. And antpetas are small ground-dwelling birds, often heard, rarely seen, because they live in the dense forest at the bottom. And so a guy named Angel Paz had found a way by going out at the same time of the day and calling them, and if he found one, he would feed them worms. He would throw out worms. Well, you have to have a lot of patience with this, and he found after doing this time after time after time, he could sort of train the birds
Entice them to come out?
To come out, and then people could see them and photograph them. Well, Frank, the cook at this lodge, had just started doing it there, and while we were there, we went out with him one morning at exactly the same time, and it was his 8th try and his 4th success. So now he's doing that all the time.
Well, that's wonderful for you guys.
Yeah.
It actually turned out all right.
Yeah.
It turned out great. In 2006, we had a doctor friend who lived in Kenya, and she was a doctor to the Maasai. And so she set up a 3-week birding tour for us. So the 3 of us went birding. And this is, to this day, my favorite trip. Sunny skies, trees that were less dense, birds easy to see, and the animals were so exciting. I wanted to see a giraffe, and the giraffes are very curious animals. When you're looking at them, they're usually looking at you. Yeah. While there, we were charged by a elephant.
Oh.
We were charged by a black rhino while we were looking at white rhinos right next to the van. Oh. And we were stalked by hippos while we were in a small boat in a lake and our motor gave out. They were all a little scary.
Well, that makes for great stories.
Yeah. We were watching and photographing a male lion while he was resting after a fight, and he had blood dripping from his face. We slept in tents and listened to the animals at night. That was exciting.
That was scary? I would think scary more than exciting.
No, it was more exciting, yeah.
You had your tent zipped up.
I woke up at 2 o'clock at night on my birthday on Mount Kenya and looked out the window down below at the lighted watering hole and watched about 14 forest elephants and other animals coming in for a nightly drink.
That's an incredible birthday gift.
That was,
right
yeah.
there, that's a great one.
We saw monkeys every day, including my favorite, the colobus. And we saw birds like this red-billed hornbill. They're quite large. A lot of large birds over there that fly, yeah. The beauty of seeing 1 million lesser flamingos on a lake was breathtaking. And seeing starlings of every color of the rainbow was amazing. But the highlights, they're too many to mention. But to see 567 birds in 3 weeks, and almost all of them lifers or new birds you'd never seen, I loved Kenya.
Yeah, Kenya sounds amazing.
It was.
Next trip, Kenya. Got it.
I highly recommend Africa to anybody that's not been there. Yeah. Okay, so we made 2 trips to Peru. By this time, Edison Actually, you pronounce it Edison, so that's how we got Eddie out of it.
This
So
is the guy that was in the picture.
correct.
Okay.
He was the guide we had in Ecuador. He started his own company called Sword Build Expeditions. And so he said, you got to come to Peru. He said, I'm guiding there now, and it's a great country. You need to come. So we signed up and went. So the first one we did central and southern Peru. And of course, if you go to Peru, you need to stop and see Machu Picchu. That's on the screen there. That's an old Incan ruin that was rediscovered in the early 1900s. And it's been restored to the way it was somewhat when it was inhabited. So that's a
that
big
picture's
tourist attraction
breathtaking.
there. Yes, it's beautiful. I wish I could have spent more time there. So then we traveled by boat about 6 hours down the Madre de Dios River into the lower or upper Amazon, I guess you would call it, to do a lot of bird watching down there. And then the highlight probably was that trip was we stopped along the way and saw these cock of the rock. This is an Andean cock of the rock. They have a lek where the males all come and vie for the females. They sit on a branch and call and wave around and do all kinds of things to make the females come.
They do a little dance and
They
everything.
do it,
a
yeah.
little jig.
Yeah.
That is that crazy. That
Yeah.
bird's crazy looking.
And the other thing that we did was we climbed a 115-foot ladder straight up with stabilizing cables on it. It was made out of rebar and cable.
Oh.
So you climbed all up on your own, own strength.
own
By
risk.
the time you got to the top, you were exhausted. So, but we went up there to see a harpy eagle, and it was a baby in the nest. So we were hoping the parents would come back and feed it while we were there, but it didn't. They didn't. So because they only feed them about once every 3 days or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
But seeing it in itself probably was amazing.
Yeah. The second trip, we went to Peru. We went for the marvelous spatule tail. I need to move there.
Yeah.
That's the bird on the poster there. We're standing by. It's a hummingbird, and you can see it has long spines coming out of its tail, and it has a big feather on the end of each one of them. And when it tries to attract a mate, it waves those feathers around. And you can Google that online and watch it. Just Google up marvelous spatule tail, and you'll see that. But this is a preserve that's been started. They're only found in Ecuador. In Peru, and so you need to go there to see them.
How long are those
They're-
little, I don't know, feathers that are?
They're several inches.
They look like they're hanging
Yeah,
fairly.
it's-
Yeah,
they're
they're
several inches long, and like I said, that they use them for their mating display.
7, 8
That's-
inches. Yeah, they're quite long.
So the highlights of that trip were we're seeing this marvelous spatule tail, and also Andean condors.
We had a trip planned to Thailand in January, but that summer our friends said that they were going to India in the fall and they needed another couple to go with them. So I said, we're in.
Of course, sign me
And-
up.
yeah.
I'm not going to turn that down. I hear ya.
And I booked a trip that night. They were surprised. So we went with Adrian Binns of Wildside Nature Tours. And India is a poor country. And it's soon to become the most populated country in the world. It's about to take over from China. Every time we were on the road and we stopped the car to get the scope out and look at a bird that was across a field or something, we were all busy looking, and as soon as we'd turn around and look, there would be a group of usually young men
Around you?
behind us, and they're very curious, and as soon as we'd let them look through the scope at what we were looking at, they were all amazed at what was in their own
I was just saying
backyard.
something they probably didn't even notice
Yeah,
before until you brought
yeah.
it to their attention.
Right, and they probably couldn't see it because, yeah. So that was pretty interesting. Here we are in this picture at the Taj Mahal. It's absolutely amazing architecture. Quite a history behind it.
Yeah.
Of course, everybody goes to India wants to see the Taj Mahal. So, and just beyond the Taj Mahal in the back is a river. And we had to go down there to bird one day, and it's just around the bend it was amazing. There's cows feeding, there's dirt, there is garbage. I mean, there's garbage everywhere in India. And there was people living in tents and
On the river?
on the river, and clothes hanging out where they washed them in this dirty water. And we're down there looking at shorebirds and pointing them out, saying, see the red bottle with that piece of white paper beside it? There's such and such. So it was a eye-opener.
Yeah,
but we loved the trip. We spent quite a bit of time at the Ranthambore Tiger Preserve. We made quite a few trips in there, and we saw tigers on 3 of the trips.
Oh.
Yeah, amazing.
How close are you to that animal?
One of them walked right by our
Vehicle.
vehicle.
Yeah.
You're in open kind of Jeep-like vehicles, big Jeep-like vehicles, yeah.
That's a
I
big
mean, if
animal.
they had wanted to, they could have pounced on you, but they're so used to those vehicles being in there. India, we loved India, and yes, there are cows everywhere.
Because our next trip was to Australia. I'm not going to, or excuse me, it was Thailand. We went in a group of 8 that time, and we landed in Bangkok and went to Chiang Mai, birded all along the way. We saw some temples outside of Chiang Mai. This is the King's Temple. There was a Queen's Temple up there too. They're quite beautiful. And it's cold in northern Thailand, so you had to wear a coat. They had open air restaurants. You had to wear a coat to go to breakfast.
You're not going to do Australia because
I'm going to skip Australia because we're going to do that in
Yeah.
a future program.
Okay. Our last trip was last fall to Colombia. It is the country with the most species in the world, but it's safe to go there now. So when Eddie decided to add that to his tour list, we jumped at the chance. I love the country. It's an absolute beautiful country to go to. And again, we met up with another guide who had learned to draw in ant-petas, and we saw 5 of them in one day and photographed them, so it was absolutely wonderful. Whoops. Oh, there we are.
That's the Ant-peta?
Yeah, that's
the
the ant-peta. And we kind of jumped past
has a
a
worm in
few
his
of them
mouth.
there. He's got a worm in his mouth that had been fed. And we also went up in the isolated mountains while we were there, and this was my target bird, the white-tailed star frontlet.
Is that a hummingbird too?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for showing us all those pictures, and you guys have been blessed with having amazing trips like that. I mean, what an incredible
Yep.
thing to be able
It's
to
a
do.
lot of fun. A lot of
Yeah,
fun.
no, that is amazing, and I'm sure you'll have plenty more, and I really appreciate you guys coming. Thank you for watching the Nature Trip TV show. Join us again in the next episode. You did great.
I told you we went
It
too
was
long.
fine. No, it was fine. I would rather go all the way to the very end than sit here and go, he's going 5 minutes, and I'm thinking, okay, what are we going to talk about for 5 minutes? Because it's a really long time.
Oh,
Let's
you
have
could
a-
have filled it with questions.
That's
but
why I
we-
skipped Australia. I
We
always
had
do-
to,
Yeah,
we
because
had
I knew
to,
we were running out of time.
well, we had to zip, and I forgot we'd put these pictures in.
That's a cute look.